What are they going to call Trump Tower if Donald Trump loses it? New York State Supreme Court Judge Arthur Engoron found Donald Trump and his adult sons liable for fraud and ordered the cancellation of Donald Trump's New York business certificates. The judge issued the order granting a summary judgment in the $250 million civil lawsuit filed against Donald Trump by New York State Attorney General Letitia James. The judge found that Donald Trump fraudulently overestimated the size of Trump Tower by 200%. In his 35-page detailed ruling, the judge said a discrepancy of this order of magnitude by a real estate developer sizing up his own living space of decades can only be considered fraud. That is a fantasy world, not the real world. The ruling also states that Donald Trump implied in his April deposition this year that his property's values, quote, cannot be inflated because he could find a buyer from Saudi Arabia to pay any price he suggests. This statement may suggest influence buying more than savvy investing. Joining our discussion now is Tim O'Brien, Senior Executive Editor for Bloomberg Opinion and the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being the Donald. He is the host of the Bloomberg podcast Crash Course, and MSNBC political analyst Andrew Weissmann is back with us. Tim, you were the first to write that Donald Trump is lying about his wealth. Very long time ago, he sued you. You won the lawsuit because he's been lying about his wealth for a long time. Now he finally hits a courtroom that is even more effective on this point than the libel courtroom that you were in.
Yeah, let's put for a long time in context. He began doing this in the 1970s. He lobbied Forbes magazine on behalf of his father in the middle of a recession, saying that somehow magically the Trump family's wealth was growing. And I think he realized very early on that he could play the press. And he did it for a number of reasons. He did it because he has this vast well of insecurity that he thinks dollar signs fill up. He cares about being pegged at the top of rich lists because he's needy. But it also was an effective tool to put him in front of bankers who might not otherwise have spent any time with him. The more he appeared in the media and the more he appeared on rich lists, the more fetching he was to lenders. And he kept this up on and on again through serial bankruptcies, through The Apprentice, and on into the present. I think the issue here is the extent to which his lies or exaggerations ultimately involved defrauding banks. When we litigated with him, this was a central issue. It was 3 pages of a much longer book, and he focused on the pages that questioned whether or not he was really worth as much as he said he did. And we went through every single property, and there was ample evidence, and this was in 2007, that he had wildly inflated the value of a number of things he owned. But he didn't care. He plowed ahead. And I think when the judge put his finger on this idea of Trump living in a fantasy world. At one point in our litigation, we asked him how he valued his golf courses, and because he didn't provide any documentation of profits and losses. And our lawyer said, well, if you don't have a P&L, how do you know how much these things are really worth? And he just shot right back, mental projections. And that is Donald Trump in his political life, in his financial life, in the world. He mentally projects whatever he wants around him, so he has this reality distortion field. What's happening now is the field's been pierced, and he's being held to account by a court of law. And I think he's in a really, significant place for both his familial legacy getting upended and obviously his ability to do business in the state of New York.
I took only one accounting course in college, and we never got to mental projection. We never got to that part of the course. Andrew Weissmann, summary judgment. Can you explain to us where this case is procedurally now?
Sure. Well, summary judgment is, in this case, is because both sides said, essentially, we win because the facts are not in dispute, and on the law is on our side. And the judge, as you noted, disagreed and denied the motion as to Donald Trump and agreed with the Attorney General for the state of New York, and so granted summary judgment on liability, finding in a very strong and with very strong language, as you noted, the various ways in which Donald Trump, in his opinion, he found committed fraud. There is now going to be an assessment of damages. The state has asked for $250 million, but that's not really the real harm to him. Obviously, $250 million even is always a lot of money, no matter what. But the real harm here is that there's going to be a receiver, and there is already a monitor overseeing what he is doing. That the former federal judge who's a monitor stays in place. There's now a receiver, and he and his family essentially are barred from doing business in New York. That's the interest that the Attorney General has of protecting the people in the state of New York from fraud and fraudsters. So that is what the receiver is going to be doing, and that is really where the financial hurt is for Donald Trump.
And Tim, the revelations here are not just that Donald Trump's been lying about his wealth, which you've been very good about reporting on for a long time. But it turns out in America, it's a lot easier to get big lenders to make those kinds of loans than it is for someone to go into a car dealership and qualify for a loan on a car, because the car dealership is much more strict about credit checking than anyone who deals with Donald Trump.
I mean, there is a lot of truth that at least it gets him in the door. I think one of the realities that's going to get tested as this thing moves into, looking at the actual records of how he interacted with the banks is the extent to which the banks relied on what Donald was telling them. Again, like when we litigated with him, he gave me these statements of financial condition that he generated. The banks went out and did their own due diligence. Maybe that did or didn't happen here.